This time we're going to focus a little bit about how AI is changing the information economy and the media landscape. So please join me in welcoming to the stage New York Times President and CEO, Meredith Kopit Levien.
All right.
Thank you so much for being here.
Props for pronouncing my name right.
Did I get it right?
You did.
Good. That's very important. Well, thank you so much for being here. You have seen so much change and growth in the media landscape since you took over at the New York Times about 5 years ago. So I'd love to hear kind of what's the biggest shift that you've noticed in the past 5 years.
Oh, that's a big, broad question. Delighted to be here. I think that the thing that we do at the New York Times, and that is done at a number of other extraordinary news organizations around the world, like the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and the BBC and CNN and others, the thing we do, high quality, independent news journalism, and also at the Times, market-leading lifestyle products that help people make the most of their lives and passions, that has become even more rare and even more valuable at, great scale to consumers. I think in a sea of misinformation and an information ecosystem where it is hard to find things that are true and of a particular quality and made by professionals, that kind of work means more than it ever has to society.
You bring up lifestyle. I want to ask you about the evolution of the New York Times, and maybe you could share more about the percentage of subscribers that are drawn to news versus the percentage of subscribers that are drawn to games, lifestyle, et cetera.
Yeah, let me do a little bit of context first. The Times has, somewhere between 50 and 100 million people who use our site, come to our site and our apps on a weekly basis, and that's before you get to anything we do sort of out on social media. And we have more than 12 million paying subscribers, so giant sort of free audience and also a growing paid audience. Within the paid audience, the majority of our subscribers subscribe to either our bundle of products, which includes news, and everything else we do, but they are most often subscribing because there's news in it, or to news itself. So the majority of people who are paying for the New York Times are paying for news and something else. And the way we think about our lifestyle products, so we're in the games business. We've got now 10 games, 5 free, 5 paid. We have the largest sports newsroom on earth. We've got more than 550 sports journalists on The Athletic. We've got, I think, the largest paid recipe site with NYT Cooking, and we've got an incredible shopping advice product in Wirecutter. All of those products now provide us just new ways to be of value in people's lives. They provide us new ways to kind of introduce new people into the New York Times ecosystem, and they are highly valuable in and of themselves. Tens of millions of people play our games every single day. But the sort of heart of the value proposition of the New York Times, I think, to consumers and to society is what we do in core news journalism. And one of the things I'm proudest of, I've been at the Times more than a dozen years, we have almost twice as many sort of core news journalists today working at the New York Times as we had when I got there. So,
and that's not the story for most.
Effort.
That's not the story for most newsrooms, right?
Well, and I'll also say one of the reasons we have such a great big games opportunity and a great big sports opportunity and so forth is because the brand New York Times stands for a level of authority and sort of trustworthiness that imbues everything else we do. And I just don't think you can separate those things.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about that. We've seen trust in media decline significantly. How concerned are you about the state of trust, but then also how concerned are you about press freedom?
Yeah, let me talk about both of those things. I do get asked a lot about trust in media, and I want to say that media is a very broad term.
Right.
And media is kind of ubiquitous in all of our lives. The thing that we spend the most time and energy doing at the New York Times, high quality, independent journalism, is a really precise and specific thing. And I think it's worth distinguishing them. High quality, independent journalism has a purpose. Its purpose is to seek the truth and hold power to account and do that. And this is the really important part, in service to no one's interest but the public's.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is when it is done well and with a lot of energy and resource going into reporting, which is what's at the core of that, and professional editing, and a set of standards for how reporters go out into the world and source and verify facts and unearth new facts, and a set of processes to keep as much bias out of the human endeavor of reporting as possible. To me, those are the things that build trust. And I think at the Times, we are doing that job of independent journalism with high resource and attention to what I've just described. And I think when we talk about media as a very broad thing, I think the questions of trust are different. I'll say one more thing. I do think that three things have happened that have made people sort of question media and question what can I trust. One, the thing I just described, high quality, fact-based, independent journalism and service to the public. People just run into that less and less now than they used to at a level of relevance to their daily lives, because so much of local journalism has collapsed, and because they run into it less, they think about it less. I think that's contributed to trust too. I think, or contributed to a loss of trust too. You have leaders working pretty hard in some instances to discredit or disavow journalism they don't like. And three, most of us have media diets fed to us in large part by algorithms, which are meant to sort of answer to the things we already know and we already like. And that's quite different from what independent journalism does.
You mentioned leaders who are creating distrust. You all have been sued by the president, and you and executive editor Joe Kahn have vigorously defended your reporting. What's next in that process?
Yeah. The most important thing to say is that press freedom, which is the thing we're really standing up for, is not just important for the future of journalism, not just important so that journalists can go out and do all the things I've just described. It's matters to society, because ultimately protecting the press, allowing it to do its job, is about having an informed public. And a democracy needs an informed public. The President of the United States has sued the Times 3 times now, and the current suit, the only money, by the way, that's been exchanged is he paid us to cover legal fees in a prior suit. In terms of the current lawsuit, we regard the claims as baseless. I would say that much of what you see in terms of suing news organizations is about an attempt to stifle further reporting or disavow or discredit the work of independent journalism, and the Times is not going to be cowed by that, nor are we going to play a part of being the opposition to anybody in power.
You're also taking a stand as it relates to AI. You're in litigation with OpenAI, and you're also suing Perplexity. Why did you decide to sue versus strike a deal?
Listen, I think the stakes for journalism, and actually for anybody producing high quality intellectual property that is expensive to make and important, are really high here. We actually are suing OpenAI and Microsoft together, and more recently Perplexity. And the idea there is enforcement of our intellectual property rights. We spend an enormous amount of money every year and have for 175 years at the New York Times on producing the journalism I just described. We had something like 50 people in and out of Ukraine last year, and everybody who is there reporting also has people working on their security and their ability to go in safely to tell a story. I could go on and on. The idea here is, how do we make sure that powerful companies can't steal our work, use it to build products to compete with us, and so that there is long-term sustainable fair value exchange for journalism.
But there is this belief out there that the New York Times is anti-AI. Is that?
I want to say that's a ridiculous idea on a couple of levels. I just said we've been around for 175 years. We have a long track record, and a particularly good track record in the last decade of using technology to get our work out to many, many millions more people. And we are certainly using AI to do that as well. I'm a runner. I like to tell people I listen to a lot of the New York Times read to me now by an automated voice when I run in the morning. That is an AI. It's on its second or third generation. I could give you many more examples of how we're using AI in the work to make the work more accessible, to enrich the journalism, to make our business more productive, and we intend to keep doing that. This is in no way about trying to slow the future from coming. This is really about making sure there is a sustainable model for high quality journalism for the New York Times and for everybody else who is doing it well into the future. And by the way, that doesn't just matter to the journalism organizations, it matters to the public for obvious reasons. And I think ultimately it matters to the AI companies, because if you don't have really high quality intellectual property, what's the whole information ecosystem going to be like?
I want to ask you about the fragmented media landscape. We're seeing a lot of journalists depart traditional newsrooms and go out on their own and start very successful ventures. How are you keeping talent?
Yeah, listen, I already told you before, we have almost twice as many journalists at the New York Times today as when I got there more than a decade ago. We regard ourselves as an institution where the best talent in journalism, hard stop, can come and do the best work of their careers. And I think that is about a lot of things. It is about when you come to work at the New York Times, your work gets exposure to an enormous audience and association with a brand that is known for a certain level of value and trustworthiness. I think a number of the biggest names you would know in New York Times journalism, people like Ezra Klein, Andrew Ross Sorkin, Jonathan Swan, Maggie Haberman, these people want to do their work at the Times because they also get to do it with and alongside other extraordinary journalists who in many cases make their work even better, push them to do that, to be the best version of themselves. And then I would also say not enough is said about the support system around journalism. I just described to you what it takes to have a lot of journalists in a war zone, but you've got lawyers helping journalists get access to information they might not otherwise have. You have people doing the sort of deep work on digital protection, and you have the world's best editors helping you conceive of the right stories. So what I say is New York Times has lots of names of people you know, and they stay for those reasons. And you also need big institutions of journalism. The world needs big institutions of journalism with lots and lots of people you may not have heard of yet doing the hard work to cover the world as I've described.
We are close on time, so I have one last question for you, and it's a fill in the blank, okay?
All right.
So AI will blank news media.
AI will make the most trustworthy brands in the world even more valuable in an era where it'll be hard to know what's real and what isn't, and what's important and what isn't.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for being here.